Hello, my friends, gaming associates, gurus, wannabes, and everybody. Here's one. I just got done watching a video from GM Grumpy on the concept of encumbrance and treasure. It's, quite detailed and quite, very good video. Highly recommend that y'all take an opportunity to visit it and, see it yourself. It's on their channel. You've seen it posted. I would put a tag in here, but I haven't figured out how to tag channels from my phone while I upload stuff. I'm sure there's a method, but far be it from me. So you get this party of players, and you turn around and you sit there and say, you've just, the evil Lepromancer is destroyed. His minions are killed or have fled. You've disabled the foul and nasty traps and rendered them safe and useless to finally get to the ultimate prize, the inner vault of this evil individual's treasure hoard, and before you there are piles and piles of strong boxes overflowing with coin of all colors from 50 different countries, both ancient and recent. You see small casks overflowing with gemstones of all colors and shapes and sizes. In the corners are full-size lifelike Ebyan statues, and you see piles of expensive carpets from the far corners of the world, exotic doodads and whatchamacallits and thingamajiggers, and it's just overwhelmingly full of stuff. Enough here to set all of you up in your own little mini kingdoms for the rest of your lives. You can retire and never go on another adventure, or you can go on a wild binge. What do you do? What do you do, in truth, right? This is a topic, as Jim, as old Grumpy Cat sat there and pointed out, one of the basic rules from the mechanic side of things is encumbrance. Wait. And we've more or less done away with it to some degree. We've done away with it a long time ago. Even from the very get-go, there was this beginning evolution of finding ways to mitigate it, because the players want a load of loot. The players want to feel like they've got the big bonanza, they've got the Monty Hall, Santa Claus has opened up his workshops, and they got a free reign, and everything and anything they could ever possibly want is at their fingertips. That's kind of half the reason that they started to go on the adventure in the first place. The other half was maybe some high-minded ideal, or pursuing some enemy, or freeing the land from some evil wizard, whatever, right? Or 100,000 different other reasons. Some simply is just because we want to get out of town. I'm the fifth son or the fifth daughter, and there's nothing for me here. Or this little mud thorp I grew up in with the 10 families and one cow. No, it isn't for me. So, what did you do? As far back as I can recall, both as a player and as a GM, a lot of the parties I was either playing with or refereeing would immediately begin collecting things such as mules, donkeys, pack animals. The favorite was the wagon. Right? If you look up the stats for the basic wagon in the GM guide, or the player's handbook, what is the capacity? 500 pounds, 1,000 pounds? You can probably get heavier ones, but then you've got to deal with the dray team. These aren't your regular horses. They're much stronger, much larger, not quite as common as what, portrayed in a lot of the TV shows and stuff of the older days. But, we got to have 2 horses or 4, some cases 6 or 8. Now we got to make sure we keep in good shape. We feed them. Or you get the ox-drawn cart. In some places they went for a barge, a large enough boat that they could, stay close enough to the river, so most of their adventures didn't get too far from their mobile base, if you will. And then, of course, the next first thing on the agenda. After a player gets his weapons and gets his armor, gets his magic book, gets his spell book, gets his wands or staffs or whatever, usually the first major piece of magic the player wants is what? A bag of holding of some sort. And over the years, these have become quite extensive. There's a number of different types. Some of them are elaborate, some of them are basic. There's a one common no when it comes to them, although there's some rules that say, or a lot of the house rules that say, be careful putting sharp objects in your sack because it could tear your sack open. Don't put a dimensional hole inside of a dimensional hole because the bad things happen. Other than that, your only limit is the capacity of the pouch or bag, and then what? We get another bag. There's no limit to how many of these things that an individual can carry, because what is other than, we go back to that endurance, what does a sack weigh? A pound, a couple pounds, empty? There's supposedly, that's the point of the magic pouch in the first place, is it mitigates this problem with encumbrance. Then we have to look at the next thing. More powerful wizards, more powerful magic users will come up with dimensional spaces. I know a couple of players that love the movable hole, because in their mind that's what it was. It was a treasure pit. It was a thing to throw a bunch of stuff in, fold it up, put it in their pocket, and pull it out when they needed it, right? And of course, we have a few rules that make it harder to get things out of them. So if you're carrying a catch of weapons or magic stuff that you need in a hurry, it takes you, the more complex time, to get to your pouch, it takes a round or two or an action or two to get something out of your pouch, etc. Now, if you're talking about taking something out of a pocket and opening it up on the ground, like a folding hole or something like that, takes a little longer. Then you got to get the item out, so on and so forth. Not something you want to do in the heat of battle and combat. Now, a lot of times, for the sake of convenience, and I've been guilty of this, I imagine a number of you have been guilty of this too, except maybe Rob. Rob, he's slick. He got a magic hat. That's what he's doing. He's putting his stuff up underneath his magic hat. Well, I don't have a magic hat. I got a magic knee pad. How's that? Huh? Magic knee pad? No, not going to stay on. I have to use duct tape to hold it on because it's saturated in damn grease. So, what do? We start to circumvent the whole problem. We don't worry about it. And as GM Grumpy points out, it's just, there's this absurdity here at some point. We reach this ridiculous concept that an average player who shouldn't at best carry 100, 200 pounds of any total, and that's including everything he or she is normally operating with. I mean, if you think about it, what does your average clothing attire weigh? Well, I'm in the Midwest right now. We're in this up and down thing. The other day it was 100 damn degrees. The humidity was almost high. It was miserable. It's been raining off and on for the last 2 days. It's still got a high humidity, but it's in the low 80s right now. It's a little cooler, not so bad. I'm not wearing as much stuff, as I would in the winter. So maybe totally I'm wearing 20, 30 pounds of stuff. When you add the size of my stuff and my shoes, which my shoes can weigh upwards of 8 to 10 pounds apiece sometimes. And that's not an exaggeration. I have a size 15 shoe. I'm just saying, they can get heavy. And then you add the fact that they're saturated in grease and then they get wet, they can get heavy. So, the average person carrying armor and underclothes, their tool kit, their gear kit, their weapons, their pack, their basic survival stuff, and a modest amount of loot, is pushing the mid-level of their endurance or their encumbrance levels. And there's a reason why encumbrance affects things like endurance. Well, it affects a lot of other things too, but we have a tendency to blow that over, right? Most of us do. I've been guilty of that. As a GM, as I've gotten older, I kind of tend to like to keep a little closer rein on things like this. I like to use that against the players in a fair way. I'm not saying I'm going to beat them with a wet sack because they're overdoing it. But I mean, if you look at things where, try climbing in a hurry. You're trying to get away from something that's trying to eat you, and you want to climb a tree, and you're carrying, 600 pounds of stuff, plus yourself. Yourself weighs 200 pounds. Now you got 800 pounds. You're trying to lug up that thing. You're going to have some serious modifiers to help your climb. You better have a good climb skill. I'm just saying, or some help. You're probably going to need the help too. And then there's the, crossing the body of water. Just crossing a good-sized stream is a lot. It can be an encounter unto itself. If you just wade out in full body armor and all your gear and lugging 400 pounds of loot with you, in addition to the 300 or 400 pounds of other stuff you've got on you, I don't care how, unless you're Conan or some really huge brute with a very large strength and constitution or a very good swim check, you should not be able to get across this thing without having some serious issues. You should sink. There's a reason why in the real world that we didn't, people who fought in sea battles didn't generally go around wearing a lot of heavy armor. They got knocked overboard. It's the same reason why in the real world a lot of ancient mariners didn't bother to learn how to swim. Because if they did get knocked over, by the time that ship got turned back around or somebody got a boat in the water, and it was just dumb luck, somebody happened to be standing right next to you and threw you a rope or something that floated, you might have a chance to survive. But the lion's share of the time, what happened? Everybody mourned your passing, and you got a footnote in the captain's log. Just pointing out the obvious, right? So back to the magic. So the next layer of magic users, this is one of those reasons that magic users are so valuable to parties, because they can conjure up items like Tensor's floating discs, or they can animate chests, or they can create pocket dimensions, or we can get a hold of magic items that can do a similar thing. And this is how we can stash some of our loot. But even those should have a modest limit. I mean, the idea that the average adventurer is going to collect a dragon's hoard of stuff, it goes into a different set of issues. And GM Grumpy didn't cover it, and I don't plan on getting into that either. We're not going to go into the Monty Hall syndrome, and we all are familiar with how that works. But, like I said, you got to deal with the objects. You got to deal with the basic idea of moving stuff around. Then there's the idea of another consideration. Nothing to do with encumbrance. Got to do with being a target. Word gets out. You guys go. Your group goes into a village or into a town, and you're just spending money lavishly. There's a scene from one of the early Conan the Barbarian movies with Arnold Schwarzenegger, where him and his buddy and his girlfriend are all there, and that just surrounded by. They're just spending their money so fast they're not even keeping track of what they're spending it on. People are just taking horrible advantage of them, and they're happy about it. Great. But they're still making a big target of themselves. At some point, the local thieves guild or some crafty I'm sorry, I can never pronounce that word, but they're going to go and figure out, hey, we got an opportunity here, let's cash in on it and try to take advantage of it. There's more than a dozen or 100 ways of taking advantage of somebody without being thumped over the head in the dark alley. I'm just saying, if you really want to be a clever GM, a crafty GM, there's plenty of ways to help lighten the load, okay? And then we've got the concept of the containers that the loot often comes in. We're all familiar, most of us should be familiar. I always, like I said, astounded when I run across the occasional person who has never watched a half dozen movies that should be the bread and butter of every fantasy RPGer or sci-fi RPGer or the concepts thereof that go in with it. So when you talk about an item like a strong box, a banded chest, well, there's a lot of this idea, and I think it's misguided, but it's never been no point of discussing it. But a player thinks that a big, heavy, strong box is designed to keep people out of it. And that's not the truth. That's a secondary function of the strong box. As GM Grumpy points out in his video, this stuff weighs a lot of weight. You know what? Put this stuff in a paper sack and see how fast the sack falls apart. Put it in a canvas sack and see how fast the sack falls apart. They don't hold up. They have a limit to how much mass they can vigorously support. So you build a chest and you band it with metal to help keep it together so the weight of the contents don't make it explode. They'll make it bow out and eventually disintegrate under internal pressure and external things like time, age, weather, environment. There's reasons. And then there's an old, I don't remember where I read it or saw it, they talked about the strong box. And one of the reasons it was called a strong box was because it took a strong man or two to move it. There's a reason you see in the movies and old westerns where they're moving the payroll, and they're in these really thick, heavy boxes with big, heavy rope handles, and it takes 2 or 3 or 4 guys to throw these things up in the back of a wagon. And how many of them do they put in that wagon? 2, 3, 4, 20? Never seen 20 in a wagon. No. Let alone that wagon making its way through, an environment like what Iowa is right now, pretty soggy. With all the rain and water and stuff, the ground's pretty soggy right now. I mean, I'm thinking of my, forebears driving their little 2-horse carts or 2-horse wagons to town through the mucky, muddy dirt roads that existed. A lot of people, we forget when we're adventuring that those roads aren't paved. They're not in Rome, unless you're in the outskirts of some really major kingdom. The odds are those roads are going to disintegrate pretty fast. Look at Game of Thrones. They do an incredible job of showing how bad roads can get in bad weather. So once again, your wagons are bogging down, your animals are getting tired faster, and the more weight you put on them, you got to deal with them too. Unless you just do the knocking, and we're just going to everybody pretend like it's not a thing. And I think we're not doing ourselves, the game, our players justice as a GM to do that. I'm with GM Grumpy to some degree. If you're going to overload yourself, I want to know how you're doing it. And I want you to give me a reasonable belief that this is a viable thing. Because if you can't, I'm going to torment you with it in some degree. I'm not going to be malicious about it, but I'm going to make you pay. If you're going to climb it's going to take you twice as long to get somewhere. It's going to take you a lot more effort to get that thing across obstacles. And, there's a lot of other players and GMs who favor the wink and a nod travel system of the teleportation, and you're there. We left town and we're there at the adventure site, when in reality it should have been a week or 2 weeks or 10 days or whatever of hard travel to get from here to there. I think we miss out on things. This is one of the reasons I favor the long campaign versus the short-term campaign. I mean, I get it if we're just playing for a night. It's a one-off, fine. I get that. Let's just start you out at the adventure point. Don't even bother with the town. This is where you're at. You already know your group's all this stuff doesn't matter. Here's the adventure to have at it. But if you're going to look at a longer term campaign, having a few adventures along the way, just getting there. Weather, road conditions, the occasional bandit or bad guy or humanoids or monsters, what have you. It's all value. It's all part of the encounter. And you don't have to have a violent encounter to have encounters, right? Just trying to get a fully loaded treasure boat or a fully loaded treasure wagon across a rocky stream should be a challenge. You don't have to do it at every crossing, but once in a while, just for a little bit of, elbow grease and effort to justify them having all that loot and hauling it around. Okay, so we rambled on that a little bit. We talked about them being targets. Everybody knows they got a load of loot and they're going to be hunted down. And that word gets out to the local bigger baddie. So a red dragon in the region might find out you got a small kingdom's worth of treasure in your wagon or in your backpack. You might be on the menu. Not because they want a snack either, just because they looking to add to their hoard, thinking, well, you know what? You owe me a tax. You're traveling through a region that I decide I claim right now, and as the big venerable red dragon who's standing in front of you, getting ready to turn you into, hot dogs on a stick, give me 95% of your loot right now. Put it in the bag. Put it right here. I'm just going to magically whisk it away. Because I'm a venerable red dragon, apparently I can do that. Right? Okay. Now, some alternate methods based off of real world stuff. One of the things, and you all know this, one of the things that the Templars set up, why the Templars became such a powerful organization in the church back in the Middle Ages, was because, not only because they went on crusades and they inspired lots of people to go on crusades, and a lot of second and third members of noble houses and non-noble houses joined up with the church to do the good work of the what have you. Well, was that somebody figured, well, I've got a lot of these would-be nobles and nobles who are going off to the Holy Land to fight for the church and for God and for country and so on and so forth. And they got a lot of loot. They want to go in comfort. They want to be there and they want to have money to spend, and they're not confident that they're necessarily going to get all that when they get there. So, instead of having a big armored train of escorts and wagons and guards and people to guard the guards and what have you, making this arduous 3,000 mile trip overland or by boat that had a 1 in 5 chance or 1 in 8 chance of sinking, they went to the local Templar church or castle or outpost or what have you, and then made a deal with them. For a small percentage, I'll give you my stuff, my money, my gold, my loot, my treasure, and you're going to give me a writ or a scroll or a chit or something that at the other end your Templar buddies are going to honor and cash in and return to me my valuables. This was the beginning of the concept of the modern day banking system. This was the first time outside in the Middle Ages, I should say, because I know if you go back to the older civilizations, they all had their versions of this, the money lenders, the money counters, on and on and on, right? But that's one of the things the Templars were famed for. So we could have that in our environment. We have loads of churches. You just need one that's reasonably, reliable, and you can make that one way of helping alleviate this problem. Because this ties in with a little thing in the back section of the GM guide. Now, I'm going to say I'm not sure if it's in the 5th edition. I'm not really sure if it's in the 4th edition, but I know damn well it's in the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd. They talk about building cities, and they talk about the economy. And when you look at the economy, this is something we also do a wink and a nod at. It's like, we're not going to worry about it, right? The treasure that the average adventurer in an RPG accumulates is an extensive sum. Even if you're a miser and handing stuff out, it's still an extensive sum. So what do? We look at the fact that these folks go into town. We're back to that Conan scene where they're just lavishingly throwing, coin away and just pouring it into the hands and drunkenly getting crazy and doing all kinds of weird stuff and having a bender. Good thing. But the economy of the majority of most of these communities don't support this kind of money. It says it right in the book. It actually gives you a set of formula for factoring that in, of course, that's extra. And that actually falls into the mechanics. We don't want a storyline. That just bogs the storyline down. It just bogs the story. No, actually it don't. You don't have to get the lawyer book out and start leveling, and get your scale out and start doing all this. No, in your story, in your head, because if you've done your due diligence as a GM, have studied this stuff, this stuff, how this works. You can translate this into a storyline saying, you go into town and I want a brand new +2, I want a brand new +2 magic sword. Well, you're not going to walk into the local weaponsmith and buy one off the shelf. First off, you walk into a small town that's got less than 300 or 400 people and less than 500 people, there's probably not going to be a weaponsmith at all. Not really, and if there is, he's more blacksmith than weaponsmith. He's a metal worker, or he's a rogue dwarf that can do stuff on the side, but they're usually in the employ of the local noble, if there is one. I'm just saying, right? They don't have a shop. And there's not going to be a, Swords Are Us to go purchase our weapons. We're not going to go down to Fred's Armory on Locust and 8th Avenue and spend our coin and our hard-earned what have you and our hard-captured dragon gold on all this fancy stuff, because it shouldn't be there. We do put it there. That's because that's just the ease of the game. It just makes it easier and fun, and I get that. But in reality, that's not how it's supposed to work. And in the average village, a couple hundred, 100 people, you know, in their entire year, if they see a 50 gold pieces worth of economy value of hard coin come through their fingers, it's a rarity. It's usually local. It's trade and barter and things like this. And what hard currency they do get is going to be saved for the occasional passing merchant, and, you know, what have you, or to pay their taxes. There's another way of alleviating the overabundance and the encumbrance problem. I'm going to roll my treasure. My adventuring party rolls into yet another of a dozen petty kingdoms. And there's folks at the gates, these little boxes on the frontier with maybe a crude pole that drops down across what passes for the road, and a couple scrungy looking dudes in armor and slightly rusted helmets, and a little mousy looking long nosed individual wearing a feather in his hat steps out of or her hat and steps out of the little hut and says, "Welcome to the kingdom of Blue Blah. We need to assess your value." The king or the queen demands you pay a tax. You're using our roads, our protection, no matter how you argue it. Fact is, you're bringing a large amount of potentially valuable items and goods and loot into this kingdom, which could totally devastate the economy. King wants a cut of it. Modern day, it's a medieval mafia kind of thing. They want a cut. And then if you get into a large enough town that has yet another noble, perhaps they want a cut. Everybody gets a cut. You know, there's an old Chinese saying, what is that? Fragrant grease. Fragrant grease make life much simpler. Everybody gets a piece. Better be doling those pieces out. Better be doling those pieces of 8 out, and those gold pieces, silver pieces, so on, so on, so on. So this might be one of the reasons why adventuring is an expensive endeavor, because better to pay the local authorities their putt as opposed to find yourself being harassed by them, or in some far corners of the world and some less than savory individuals and kingdoms, perhaps there's a connection between them and the underworld where the king's furious that he's not got what he thought to do to him. He finds out that this particular group of rangy individuals just came into his region and is spending an insane amount of loot in these little towns and upsetting the economy, and he's not got a piece of it except what he's taken out of the hands of the locals that have gotten overpaid. Sends out the bully boys to go collect. You know, the tax collectors. There's, you know, everybody hates the tax collector for a reason. Then there's also the possibility where the party beats up the tax collectors or somehow magics themselves into a charm or this, that, and the other thing. And the king's advisor turns to the king and says, "Leave it to me, sire. Leave it to me." And she goes over and goes down to the other end of town, has a talk with some individual who knows an individual, and next thing you know, you're waking up in the middle of the night and you're with a bunch of black suited individuals rummaging through your stuff. Well, the fight's on, but how much did they get before that happened? Before you woke up, or so on and so forth. Right? Just saying, multiple ways and many things to make that encumbrance still matter in a game system. Fat Man's 2 cents on it. I had a half hour or so to kill. I think I'm pretty close to that. I got a restaurant here, not quite 9 o'clock, but these folks have a nice habit of slipping out the back door if I don't show up a little sooner than what they want me there. Not exactly one of my favorite clients, but they are monthly, and I am here to service, as I am to help give a little bit of inspiration, a bit of thought, a bit of chicanery, perhaps a bit of lunacy, insanity to this hobby that we all love and share. And Every little bit of video helps. Every little bit of perspective from every individual out there, every one of your views on things helps widen my view of how we do things. And I hope betters, improves on what I can do and what I can't do, because it gives me alternate insights. It also reminds me of stuff that I may have had or had not done years and years and years ago. So GM Grumpy's stuff, he's worth watching. He's worth following. If you haven't tagged him, tag him. He's not really known for answering some of his comments. You're not Grumpy Cat, but it's okay. I'm not expecting you to cater to me or anybody in specific, but you do good stuff. You got some good topics, and it's worth an interesting set of things to consider. Mostly anyway. Till next time, game on, play scare, and remember, encumbrance is your friend.